Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and in studio today, we're actually using the small studio today because the big one's busy.
Really? I figured you like relegated me to the back room after all these
kitty
years.
table. The kitty table.
I feel like it.
State Senator Mark Montigny is joining us. It's great to see you. I know it's a busy day today and lots going on, but again, it's thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.
It's great to be here, Jim. It's ironic. It has been busy because we're in caucus and session this week. So I'm trying to just bunch together every meeting I can get into on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. So it's been a little bit of a whirlwind.
I got to tie this. I mean, you came here, which was perfect scheduling, and you scheduled it because you were at SMAST right next door to us.
Yep.
Something that you've been working on for a long time. That new building's fantastic.
You know, SMAST, I don't think of this because I've been in too long, but one of my first legislative efforts was on SMAST a long time ago.
So what do you, when you go over there today and talk to them, what are you looking at? Because obviously they're expanded their work so much since. So
I know we have a tight timeline and a pretty busy agenda, so I'll just say it quickly. Obviously, they're doing important work for us, and even more so now with wind energy and always with the scallop industry. But then there's just the core marine sciences and the related topics where they're educating brilliant scientists for the future. Today, though, was to meet with a bunch of union leaders who are frustrated with things on campus, and I get together with them at least once a year to let them tell me how I can block and tackle for them. As the campus gets more and more unfocused on the region, they need to be heard by their elected officials.
And SMAST in itself, and I should say too, that it's the School for Marine Science and Technology, for people that don't know, and it's a part of UMass Dartmouth. Are we seeing, and do you know, they talk about kids not going into the fields. Are you getting that sense from them?
I mean, that's a better question for them because most of the comments today have been about the work environment. Yep. These are union leaders who are good people who represent a lot of my constituents, and they're relaying, things that they are not happy about.
And their work is, like
Great
you said, their
work.
work is going up.
It's cutting edge, and it's important.
Tying in with UMass, while we're just on the subject, and we get it out of the way at the start. The Star Store, obviously, which I was there when you in the legislation.
You were polishing a brass Star Store plate that I donated that somebody had given to me for the groundbreaking with my mom and my Aunt Teresa in the front row as I made it. One of my most passionate speeches to this day that I felt really good about.
That was really
You really did polish the brass plate.
That's a true story, no word. That was something that obviously at the time heralded as one of the biggest achievements in Southeast, in the city. Mayor Kalis, it was a huge big deal. Yeah. And we know what it is what it is right now. What are you looking at and going forward right now?
Well, the most important thing is that people understand the history and why I feel so personal about it and so offended by the university and DCAM. There are very few things that when you retire or the voters decide to retire you, that you can say with a straight face, if not for my tenure, that may not have existed, right? So I put 5 years of my life into creating the project. Very expensive, very time-consuming. My legislation developed the Star Store into the College of Visual and Performing Arts. It also cost a lot of money, and for 23 years, I managed it year in and year out in the budget, including through its demise because of the university and DCAM more recently. So some people have said, well, you seem to take this one personally. I do. I created the project for this reason. When Peter Cressy wanted a building, he wanted it on campus, and we could have done it for half the price. I said to Peter at the time, I'm not interested in that. And he, well, you represent I said, yep, and I have a lot of priorities for the university. But this one is an arts and cultural renaissance that we want to promote in downtown New Bedford. As you know, Jim, although I crossed my fingers for a long time, because if the project failed early in my tenure, remember I was only in a couple of terms when I did the legislation, I might have lost my job because it was seen as a white elephant, empty, that could burn down if left empty. But you really want to use taxpayer money to get that done? I sold it to the public And in a way, because we had studied the issue, I worked with Tony Souza in a very small group. There were no friends on this. Even the campus was skeptical. They didn't want this white elephant, as they called it, without its own endowment fund. Only a chancellor of a university could say, thanks for the $20 million project, but do you have another 10 so I can, set up an endowment? Long story short, we went to that day. I was very proud to have my mom and my aunt there, because for me, the legislature is not a place where you build a lot of discrete projects. You work on things like, no one has done more to advance commuter rail to this region than I. But I didn't do it alone. There's a big chorus full of very active people, and we had to have a governor finally expend the money that I and others wrote into bonds and wrote into law. So you celebrate that together. This is one of the few projects where I can bring my son, who's 9 years old, and he's been to Starstore many times with me, and say, Daddy believed in the arts and culture and knew that this would create a greater renaissance, and it worked. The Starstore, but it wasn't just the Starstore. I earmarked probably $40 million between the Starstore, downtown streetscapes, tax credits for the upper floors being full. Every arts and cultural institution benefited. For instance, when the director of the Zeiterion came to me when you were there and said, we will close the Zeiterion if you do not get us $500,000 immediately. I was chair of Ways and Means. I got it immediately. What's the Zeiterion now doing? National class theater. It's amazing
You're going through a huge
that
renovation
staff
right now.
has done, and that board of directors. So as disappointed I am in DCAM and UMass failing the students and failing us, a couple of things. One, I'm still determined. I'm working diligently with the Secretary of Administration and Finance, Matt Gorkowitz, who was my budget director when I was chairman of Ways and Means. So it's ironic, the small world. The most important person in the future debate of finance for New Bedford is the Secretary of A&F, and I trained him as my budget director at Ways and Means. So I still have hope. I want to see an arts presence in there. I want to see a university presence. But most importantly, I want to see the building full, and I want the law to be conformed to. I want the building transferred to a state entity and a private nonprofit, maybe Waterfront Historic League. So
do you have to change the legislation from what originally had happened?
Well, the first thing that has to happen is they got to conform to the law as written by me. So it was the original legislation,
right,
a 20-year lease. But let's not forget, the reason why I blame UMass and DCAM is in the last 3 years, I wrote several laws signed by the governor to enforce the $1 transfer.
Right.
And the university and DCAM blew it. There's no, there have been certain politicians who like to take credit for everyone that have tried to set up a false narrative. There have been certain media that have, I think, reported a false narrative. The bottom line is it's all in law and regulation and bonding and finance and a lease. So every time somebody wants to debate it, and I'll debate anybody on the issue, I say, well, here's the law. If you can come back and tell me that didn't get signed by the governor, and the lease didn't call for this, and you didn't blow this deadline, then we can have a debate and blame others. But the bottom line is both the Division of Capital Asset Management and the university had a chance to get that equity for the taxpayer for $1 because of a vision I had and a lot of hard work.
And I don't want to belabor it because we got other stuff.
But
so you're still looking at it, and I know others are, but you're still not confident, but you're still working on it. There should be something there, whether it's a state building or something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, here's the good news. So I would like to see it still be tied in. Like, if you remember, because you were there, the vision that I came up with back at that time wasn't just the Starstore. It was an arts and cultural renaissance in downtown.
And BCC was part of that too originally.
BCC was a big part of it. That helped us tremendously because they brought thousands of students. The artists are a smaller group, but impactful. Second part of that vision, which is now complete, was turning Route 18, and we earmarked money for that, into almost like a zipper tying together the waterfront and the Starstore. The third part, which is now coming to fruition now, was, and again, when I say vision, everybody has a vision, and it means nothing unless you write law and bonding. The city has no money to do economic development. The federal government doesn't do much, although they've been helpful lately on dredging and some things in the waterfront, which is great. But all of the economic development of the South Coast comes through the state legislature to the governor's signature. And the state pier is no different. So I wrote this language, what I call my vision language on it, but not just because I have a vision. Everybody's got a vision on this. I wrote the law with the bonding authorization. So just now, Mass Development issued an RFP based on, again, this stuff doesn't happen because you send a letter like so many politicians do. It happens if you have law or regulation that directs a certain entity. The law that I passed, signed by the last governor but supported by this governor, directs the Mass Development to take over control from the DCR because they were not promoting. The pier was empty. It was underutilized, grossly. Not so much mismanaged by any individual, but underutilized because the DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, didn't belong in the pier development business. Mass Development does. So,
and you talk about
what does it mean?
Mixed development too. I mean,
Yeah,
you've liked that theme.
Well, no, that's what I mean by saying it's not just my vision, because a lot of people are now saying it's my vision, it's my vision. I laugh at the local level, the state level. It's law written. The reason I keep saying it's vision is hot air. It's what law do you have that directs it, or what finance mechanism do you have that pays for it? So I did a $25 million bond through the Senate, it's now law, as well as language that issued the RFP. They've now, as of February 28th, those RFPs are being reviewed. We're going to have a public process the week of April 8th, I hope. Mass Development has not been forthcoming in a public process, so the whole House delegation and myself have demanded more transparency. And they feel very strongly also, but I feel particularly strongly because it's my legislation. And they were not conforming to the law as written. And, when you have authorship of something, you are then accountable to the taxpayer. So if they are not transparent, the taxpayer will say to me, well, why did you allow it?
So when it comes to the state pier too, and I know that obviously the fishing industry is something you've worked with, the goal obviously is to maintain the fishing industry, which is what it's there for, along with that outside development, whatever it might be.
So the law is very clear. You must, first of all, the state pier, by law and regulation, must be used primarily for water-dependent uses. So there's no displacement, and we'll ensure this as a delegation. Remember, it's not a city pier, so the city may have an opinion on it, but it's controlled by the state legislature and the governor.
And it's always been like that.
It's always been. It's going to stay like that. It will never change. It will be the state pier in New Bedford in perpetuity. The ferry terminals will be retained, both for Cuttyhunk as well as the
C Street, right?
C Street for Vineyard and Nantucket. What we're doing is subtracting nothing from the current water-dependent uses, freight, fishing, etc., ferry terminals, but we're adding to it, again, what I keep calling the vision language. It's the first time where, by law, it's been allowed to develop non-water dependent uses. So right in my language, literally word for word, it says a fish market, retail, restaurants, in the law. This isn't, again, a press release or Mark talking about something he hopes happens. It's in the law as passed and signed by the governor that I wrote as far back as 2008, believe it or not. So Mayor Lang was very supportive. The whole city council was very supportive. Mayor Mitchell is now supportive, along with this city council. I think it's going to happen. These proposals will be reviewed publicly, and to me they need to be scored on who gives us that mixed use, because remember what the vision, remember what the three parts were. Downtown's done, the Star Store. No matter what the next iteration of Star Store, we're not going backwards in downtown. Star Store did its job. That doesn't mean leave it empty.
Well,
we're an advanced arts and cultural city now.
I don't mean just one quick thing going back on the Star Store. One of the things too that was talked about when that was developed is the whole point of getting college kids in the downtown.
They spend money.
Which it did, exactly.
And
a lot of businesses were benefiting from a lot of college students, and again, Bristol Community College was there, so was UMass Dartmouth students.
That's right. And again, why I take it personally, Jim, is first of all, I grew up in New Bedford like you.
And you're a UMass
and I'm
Dartmouth
a UMass
graduate too.
Or SMU, but now UMass Dartmouth. My father was a whaling artist in New Bedford. I have spent my entire career as a student trustee at UMass, remember, student trustee on the board. I worked for the chamber. What does the chamber do? Promote the interests of the city and its economy.
Yeah.
I then ran for the Senate, and my focus, although use focus broadly because I represent New Bedford, Dartmouth, Fairhaven, Acushnet, and Mattapoisett, so I have a pretty broad district interest. But my singular capital focus has been on the arts and cultural renaissance, which it is, on its connection to the waterfront, and now this mixed-use concept where the tourists from downtown and the residents from downtown that eat and enjoy and sleep
And the restaurant
in a hotel,
business, the restaurants downtown
thriving.
have been, done very well.
Thriving, fabulous. Why? I used to spend summers in Newport when I was younger for social reasons. And I said to somebody the other day, I was there for the first time at a restaurant in Newport for the first time in a while, and the kid happened to be from New Bedford, this kid Darius, and I said, I don't have to come down here. I said, I've worked on this waterfront, and now I've got so many restaurants in downtown New Bedford, I can keep myself busy for a few weeks. And they're better, because our seafood is better than Newport buys it from us, and my opinion is we cook it and do it better here.
So what do you, in order to get the state pier now, and again, as you said, I know the mayor is advocating for it, the council has talked about it in their meetings advocating. What are you up against?
Well, I mean, what we're up against is inertia in government, right? There's always this slow-moving bureaucracy. So think about it. I wrote the vision law, and what I mean by that is the mixed use. Every time you hear me say that, I'm saying that to be short, because I don't feel like going into, well, the mixed use amendment that called for a blah, 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 and an RFP at Mass Development. Just think of this, the big difference that I'm trying to promote, and that most support, not everyone, is that the pier will no longer be underutilized, and it will no longer be exclusive to water-dependent uses like ferry, like freight, like
We had cruise ships there too.
Fender. Yeah, but so the cruise ship piece, though, ironically, will be part of this new mixed use. They have a proposal to expand. They're not going to contract. So there's room down there on this underutilized port that fits in beautifully. It doesn't displace, like if you look at the mix, we're maximizing the economic development through wind energy, through retaining the sacred cow, which let's say it right out. There is nothing in tourism or in wind energy that's good enough to displace the fishing and scallop industry.
Well, people, it's funny. People just go down to the piers just to see the fishing
boats.
boats.
Of course they do, because it's beautiful. If you're from out of town and you go on that working waterfront, so one of my jobs is to block and tackle for all of the interest and to make sure they do coexist. So I wrote the legislation on making it more touristy, but I'm a huge protector of the fishing industry and no displacement of the water-dependent uses. So it's a sometimes unhealthy balance between wind, fishing, and tourism. It's a very tenuous balance. So it's not an enemy of the project, but it makes everybody work harder and think harder. And because I support the concept of all three, it puts me sometimes in the middle of all three. But the second big thing is the pier. It's a state pier. It's a state asset. It's in decline. It needs work. And the city can't pay for any of it. The feds won't. So it's all coming through the legislature.
Do you feel as though Mass Development is going to go along with the proposals that come out that you're looking for and others are looking for?
So I haven't always been happy with Mass Development. I made a choice when I wrote the law to designate Mass Development for the issuer of the RFP. I didn't do that lightly. I didn't feel there was another agency that could be the successor to the division, the DCR, that would do a better job. That does not mean I think Mass Development's done a perfect job, nor do I believe that there won't be other times I'm pissed off or disappointed in them. So it was like I don't want to say the lesser of evils, because I don't mean it that way, but let's say among a bunch of difficult choices, the best choice. Because whenever you try to do a hybrid development between the private and public sector and governments in the middle, and you have water-dependent uses and you're trying to come with this new vision for mixed use, you're going to have challenges and headaches. But it's been done successfully in other places in the world. It can be done in New Bedford.
The one thing that does seem clear is that there are businesses that are interested in going down there.
Yeah, so I'm trying to be careful. I skirted your question on it. I don't want to favor until I see them present. I went on with Chris McCarthy on WBSM the other day, and I said critically that mass development should stop the gag order, that all the developers should be able to talk to anybody they want. So they're going to have a public process, but we're going to push them further. I want every one of the proposals to go on Chris McCarthy's show. And by the way, they should come on Jim Marshall's show. Let them lay out their drawings and their provisions for job creation at the local level. I want a very transparent process because although some of these can coexist, if you look at the proposals, some of them will contradict, and choices need to be made. Mass development will have some autonomy in that. They will be making the decisions since they're now the controlling interest. But we as the legislature are the controlling interests of mass development. So if we are not hearing favorable things from our constituents, then they'll hear it from us.
And I would assume the city, in that regard too, the city officials have to be heard too, because they have, like you said, you can't have duplication or whatever. You've got to have, everything's got to be in sync.
No, the city gets input, but it's a state peer.
No, I understand that, right.
Of course the city has input. The city sometimes thinks that they have some controlling interest in it, and they don't. But they of course they have to have input, and so does the town of Fairhaven that shares, that shares the harbor. But I don't want to minimize that the city needs input, but let's be clear again, state peer, state financing, state legislation.
Only got a few minutes left, but I got to talk
Why does time fly
I know.
when I'm with you?
Housing has been a huge issue. I know that your colleagues in the House have been talking about it, and there's no easy answers. And I usually ask them sort of legislatively, what can be done?
So it's enormous, the challenges, and I have always, as you know, I've always worked hard on commuter rail. Like if you think about it, I remember Jim Mathis one day saying, this was years ago, he said, when commuter rail finally comes, you'll rest easy, and you should be seen as one of the fathers of it. And I remember saying to him, be careful what you wish for from me, because although I believe in the project, and I'm pleased to have played a role, a big, key role, especially early on when we were writing most of the language and the funding, if you remember back in those days. But it took a governor to say, I'm willing to spend that money. It took the whole House delegation to say, we're on board. For years, think about it, I remember when Deval Patrick was governor, I stopped cheerleading. I remember being at a press conference one day and a local reporter came and said, what am I missing that you're not, as the sponsor of a lot of this, why aren't you cheerleading? And I said, because I'm sick of governors making a promise and not delivering. When Bill Weld, remember the famous thing when Bill Weld said, sue me if you don't have commuter rail by 1997. What he said was, sue me, Montigny, if you don't have commuter rail by 97. I wasn't even in the legislature. I was introducing him when I was president of the Fall River Chamber of Commerce. And when I introduced him, he looked at me and said, in a funny way, it was like, you sue me, Mon. And I joked, I saw him one day about 10 years ago, and I said, I'm still looking for that 200-year-old trust fund, Governor. But it's not really funny, right? I mean, it should have been long ago. But what I meant when I said to Jim, I said, as much as I believe in it, and there's a bunch of reasons why. It isn't just to hook us closer to Boston and, tourists coming this way, workers going. There's a bunch of reasons why I favor it. What I'm disturbed by is from the beginning we have warned every governor that if we did not prepare adequately at the local and state and federal level for housing, the unintended consequence was going to be severe. So now we're in real time. It's coming closer to the day, and we already, because of what COVID did, is it made a whole bunch of people in expensive markets like Boston start to look at New Bedford and say, wow, I can't believe I can live there for that price in that beautiful place. All the stuff we've been saying all along. We're lucky to live here. I've been all over the world. I mean, I think last count, I've been to 90 countries. I live a half mile from where I grew up. It is a beautiful, fabulous area. People have discovered it. And before the train even got here, yes, some of that is speculators, but some of it is just that during COVID, people started to realize they don't need to be in overcrowded, overpriced, headache capital city, Boston, and they started to look elsewhere. If you look far enough out of Boston, like where you're not in an immediate commute, where you can just jump on the T, never mind commuter train, New Bedford is your place. Like, who wouldn't want to be on
Yeah.
Buzzards Bay for a quarter of the price? But now we, those of us that live here and represent people that live here, are, if we're not careful, being priced out. And it's scary. And a lot of things need to be done. The federal and state government need to step up with more money. But I'll tell you, one of the singular biggest things is we have certain zoning and legislative mandates in New England, like it's like a home rule historic community from way back that don't exist in other places, where it's really hard and really expensive to develop housing. You have local communities who fight against 40B. I mean, it's called anti-snob zoning for a reason, because snobs are preventing people from developing affordable housing.
Yeah.
And what happens then? If you look across the state, you know, people debate me on that, and they're even offended by the term. I say it to offend. I say it to make them come to me and say, show me your affordable housing figures. And if you look, there are communities in the state who have 1 or 2% affordable housing when the law says that everybody decades ago should have had 10%. Where do they end up? They come to the places that already have good affordable housing, like New Bedford, and that makes our housing unaffordable. We cannot take all of those displaced everywhere else in the state because of price without throwing it out of equilibrium.
Right. You got about a minute and a half left here, but I wanted to touch base because one of the issues that the legislature is dealing with, and again, your colleagues, just talking about the immigration issue right now, that with immigrants coming into the state, I know the governor's, we're out of money.
What's a mess? It's a mess that's not going to get better unless the federal government, that means the president and the Congress, get off their duffs and fix it. So what's happened is people just are showing up in states like Massachusetts, and you know, we have a humane society. And even if we did not have a humane society, people who live in neighborhoods do not need hundreds of homeless people sleeping on park benches. So even if you choose not to be humane, and I am, but there's no excuse for what's going on at the border. I heard a congresswoman the other day on CNN say, we don't have a problem at the border. And I'm thinking, what bubble are you living in?
Yeah.
We have a crisis at the border that is now bubbling into many states like Massachusetts. We cannot, in this budget, we don't have the time today, as a Ways and Means chairman formerly, I could tell you about finance. It's growing dangerously, and the Congress is dithering, and the president isn't answering the calls. So I'm disappointed. I'm very, very disappointed in the way both parties in Congress and this president have handled it.
Because they've left it to you, basically, to fix it.
And it's not being solved. All we're doing is warehousing people. It's not being solved by this governor or by the legislature. It can't be. It's got to be solved by the federal government.
Yeah. Well, lots on the plate. It's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
To be here.
We got to do it again.
As Bill Burns would say, Jimmy Marshall.
We got. There's a lot of topics we can go over, but we'll get you back in when Rail comes
great to be
in
with you, Jim,
and State
seriously.
Pier. Let us know. Keep us updated with the State Pier too.
Give my best to Kim and your kids, and I'll do the same to
With
my
Marcus.
9-year-old angel.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.